Welcome once again, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone or world you're in. My name is Twan Claiborne, and I am facilitating tonight's SWAT talk with Dr. Rebecca Hall. Before we begin our conversation, I'm going to review the logistics of this event. The event is being recorded, and within 2 to 3 weeks, it will be shared on Swarthmore College's website, so you can always revisit and spread the news with your friends. For the first 30 minutes, Dr. Hall and I will be conversing with questions I have created and insights that she will present, build off of the banter, and then we will take questions from the audience. So at any time, if you have a question, you can type it in the box and I will take note of it and we'll answer the questions that way. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Rebecca Hall, originally from Brooklyn, New York. Shout out to Crown Heights. In her graphic novel, Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts, historian Rebecca Hall, Dr. Rebecca Hall, tells the largely untold story of women who planned and led slave revolts on the Middle Passage and throughout the Americas. Named the best book of 2021 by NPR and The Washington Post, Wake is part graphic novel, part memoir, where Dr. Hall, as a granddaughter of slaves, weaves together a narrative of her own family life with deep archival research that uncovered women warriors. In Wake, Dr. Hall writes, like at a wake as in a funeral, we speak of the dead and for the dead. At this wake, we must defend the dead. Our memories must be longer than our lifetimes. Dr. Hall shares excerpts from Wake, including its illustrations by Hugo Martinez, a New Orleans-based graphic artist and illustrator. Welcome, Dr. Hall.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Because I have this mic on now. Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to have to, all this stuff is trying to turn on in the background. So suddenly Janelle Monáe was blasting. Here, actually, let me take the headphones out because maybe apps won't randomly start.
That's so organic too, because she's definitely, in touch with multiple dimensions and bringing stories and her stories and his stories and their stories all to the forefront.
Yes, and she's from the future.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I respect
that. So it's all interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
So before we dive into the book, I want to just pick your brain about your journey because I'm in the world of education, and so many educators have left education and end up pursuing something like medicine or law, yet you went into law and then decided to leave law and get a PhD in history. What sparked that change of fields and interests?
Sure. So I decided I needed more student loan debt. And so I thought, let me do a history PhD. I mean, those take at least 7 years. I'm still, paying the debt. Apparently, suddenly I don't fall into a forgiveness category, even though I was a Pell Grant recipient. But it's some weird arbitrary category of direct student loan that suddenly just got dropped. But we can talk more realistically about what happened. But I don't know if folks have seen the book or the cover of the book. I thought it'd be good to just start. So the book is Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts. And Twan, you already gave a shout out to my illustrator, Hugo Martinez.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to law school. I graduated from Swarthmore. Well, I was done in the winter of 84, but I went to Berkeley Law at 86 through 89. And then took the bar, passed it, fortunately, and practiced law for 8 years. I worked with homeless families and represented low-income tenants' rights stuff, eviction defense and suing slumlords. That was my favorite thing to do. But after 8 years of that, I burned out for a variety of reasons. I talk a little bit about it in Wake. I talk about leaving the practice of law, and it's sort of the ways in which sort of racialized gender is sort of baked into systems. And I just got frustrated with it. And I actually always loved history. I got my BA in history at Swarthmore. But I thought that if I went on and became a historian, like went and did the PhD, that I would feel too removed from what's happening in the world, what needed to happen sort of on the ground. And I was like 22, 23, so I get away.
Yeah.
But then I was like, you know what? This is, I don't want to do this anymore. So I was happy to go back and get that PhD. So yeah.
And you got
I don't know if that's I did.
No, that is a great answer. You got it. It seems like you made these transitions in such interesting times in history, the mid 80s starting out in law and what was happening with a lot of political policies in major cities with, broken windows and trying to fix, urban decay. And then you have your PhD process in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's like, that's the multicultural apex of all things. But then it
was it. No one told
right. That's what it was supposed to be, right? We were all sitting together, singing Kumbaya and
build. Oh, right. They've been saying that for a long time. Hold on one second. Let me just. So I'm just trying to keep my dog from barking up the whole place. Go ahead.
The family, right? All of these different things are happening at such transitions. Speaking about your most recent book, Wake, did the current climate and conversations regarding race and racialized gender and class have informed your work in any way or inspired the need to do the work?
It's funny. I had this, when the book came out, I was on Twitter. Oh, you can follow me at Wake Revolt on Twitter. I had this tweet like, order my book. White people say it's timely. because I did this research 20 years ago. It wasn't in response to anything. It's Wake Revolt, not Wake Report.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So no is the short answer to that question. Yeah.
That's very interesting because even reading it, it still feels very timely. And, as I said, certain communities will be like, this is the thing to do. This is the text to read to, get some information.
Right.
Do you mind talking about your writing process in this book? Was it different from the previous text that you wrote?
Yeah.
What was that process like?
Yeah, so before this, I had only ever published, academic stuff like articles and book chapters, and, and law school textbooks or articles. Yeah, all academic stuff. This was my first time writing something for like a mainstream press, and that wasn't targeted at academic audiences. I'm wondering, Tuan, it might be good to pull up an image because it's hard to talk about this book without seeing an image. It doesn't even matter what image you put. Like, do you have that 2-page spread or whatever?
Yes, I do. Let me pull that up right now. Okay. Someone in the audience lets me know they can see it. So for those at home, this is an image of our protagonist, Dr. Hall, walking down the street. And within this street, you can see images of ancestors, slaves in the windows of the buildings, also on the backs of the car of the NYPD police, as well as in the puddle that is on the street.
Right. Yeah, so this 2-page spread is an image. Hugo and I spent a long time trying to figure this out, but and why don't we just jump into this question, because so the reason why I chose this medium is because it lets you, like, for example, it lets you, oh, whoops, I didn't get it lined up just right. Hugo's going to be bummed, but that the graphic medium allowed me to sort of put the past and the present right up against each other, which is crucial for for this particular project. And in this image, we're seeing, so I'm talking about this revolt that happened in New York City in 1712.
Mm.
And I'm, explaining sort of what happened, and then we can see, like Tuan was saying, the reflections of, slavery and the slave trade in New York City in the 1700s. Just to back up a little bit. So the book, the graphic narrative, Wake, I don't love the term novel, because to me that means fiction. So I'm trying to single-handedly rename category of book. So I'm just calling it the book or narrative or whatever. Is a story of, I basically turned my dissertation into this graphic narrative. And specifically it was on these two revolts that happened in New York City in the early 1700s, one in 1712, which, specialists knew about, and then one in 1708, which I was the one who did the excavation of that. It tells the story of, and also revolts during the Middle Passage on slave ships. We can talk about that too. But so it tells that story, and then it tells the story of my research process. So that's the kind of the memoir part. And as Tuan was saying in the introduction, my paternal grandparents were born enslaved. My grandmother, I'm not saying great grandparent, I mean grandparents. My grandmother was born enslaved on a plantation, plantation in Missouri. And my grandfather was born also 1860, a plantation on a farm in Tennessee. My father was the youngest of their kids, and he was born 1898. He fought in World War I. And I was born in 1963. So I was also the youngest, and of course there's generation skip in my family, right? But the fact that it's even physically possible is the point, right? So the idea that this, slavery happened so long ago, et cetera. So that's, so when I was doing the dissertation research, and for folks here who are historians, it takes a long time. It was 4 years of full-time research and, and writing. And it was difficult. It was difficult emotionally, and kind of, because it's a difficult topic. And, I spent months and months combing through slave ship captains' logs, and so I kind of called on my grandmother. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, so I don't know that I was thinking I was literally doing it. It's more as just like a feeling of like, can you please help me with this? And this feeling of like, but mainly what it did was give me perspective, like, if she could live that, I could research it, it helped me sort of get perspective on that. So she makes an appearance in the book, and then it sort of ends looking at how, this country, we live in the afterlife of slavery and what that means, sort of connecting past and present.
That is, I don't even know where to start with that, because there's so many more to chew on, right? The fact that you said your direct lineage is connected to this. And I feel like so many people within our country do not understand that. Yes, 1865 was 150 something years ago, sure. Yet there are people who have a direct connection, can name family members, have pictures with family members who were born into this system. So it's definitely an important thing to acknowledge. And that urgency, just in this image alone, that urgency and connection is still there, ever present in all the things you do, and you highlighted that in your research. I'm curious though, because this book primarily focused, you mentioned, on New York, the two slave revolts in New York in the 1700s. And we know that there are narratives where there are revolts that are not in New York in the 1700s. was there, in doing your research, did you intentionally consider that? Or did you find that the nature of your resource sort of led to focusing primarily in the Northeast region?
Right. So I think, so, as Twan was saying, I'm from New York City originally. And I think one of the things that was really shocking to me was I did not know how implicated the city was in slavery and the slave trade. And I didn't learn about it until I went on to graduate school. And so this feeling for me of like, wait a minute, I got my BA at sophomore in history, and, I read a lot, and why didn't I know these connections? And so that was one thing. I think wherever I would have drilled down, I think I could have found similar things, but when you're getting a PhD in history, you have to sort of so my time period was the 1700s, British America. So that's why my work focuses on that period. And I should say one more thing about this image while that we have it up, and it might shed light a little bit on my working process with Hugo.
Mm-hmm.
So Hugo, is this incredible illustrator. He had never done anything like this before. I had never done anything like this before. It started as a little Kickstarter, and then it blew up, and it went to literary auction. And it was and by the time we signed the contract, we're like, oh, wow, we've got to do this. And turn it in like 15 months. So we didn't know what we were doing. And so a lot of the work that we did, I mean, he's the artist. I can barely draw. So, but, we spent so much, but every panel and layout we designed together.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us so many different iterations, like, should I be in the subway, and should there be reflections in the glass? Should I be here? So finally we're like, okay, this is it, we're the street. And then he came back with a pencil, and in it was the police car with the nooses. Mm-hmm. I didn't ask him to do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, but that works. So if you want to pull up, Twan, did you want to pull up that other image I was talking to you about, so we can talk about this graphic medium generally?
Which one? Let's see.
The one, not that one. The one I sent you originally by email. Yes, here we go.
Right here, yes.
So
on the left.
Go ahead. Yes. So people ask me a lot, and it was already, Twan and I talked a little bit before you all joined us. One of the questions I get a lot is, why a graphic narrative? Why did you choose this method? And like I was saying, the narrative, this method of sequential art lets you put the past right up against the present in a way. I don't know if I could have done that in prose. And even I can't think of a better form, frankly, for doing that. The other thing is that the methodology of comics is fascinating. I've been a fan. I never thought I would write one. when I was like, wow, we just committed to doing this, I read everything I could. Like, there are comic scholars, there are people, there's a lot of stuff out there. But one of the things I think it's important to understand, and what was really important, is that, if you want to see every frame of something, you go to a movie, right?
Yeah.
With a graphic narrative, we're choosing to construct, so the spaces like are panels, and then the spaces between are called the gutter, right? So you've got panel, gutter, and you have to put a lot of effort into, like, how are we going to construct a story in a way that makes sense? But there's so much co-creation that happens with the reader, because the reader is determining things like how long to look at an image, or how quickly to do it, or what even order to, so, but the other thing about this panel gutter relationship, there's this great, one of these comic scholars, Scott McCloud, has this book, Understanding Comics, and he has this chapter that's called Blood in the Gutter. And so again, the gutter is the space between the panels. I realize I'm moving my mouse around and whatever, but no one can see that mouse, right?
No, not at all.
Okay, I'll stop doing that. So the idea of this is that the gutter is where a lot of action happens, And he sets up this chapter by like, it shows like a traditional comic book, like, there's somebody's like, I will kill you with this axe, and is like standing, and then you hear like off screen, like it moves to, you don't see them anymore, but you hear the scream. And then it's like, well, who killed them? You did, the reader, because it happens in the gutter. And so here in this image, I have tracked down the women by looking through the court records that were charged in for being involved in the 1712 revolt. And I go through like, so many pages and pages and pages trying to find something like their testimony, something. And then what I found was the sentence of like, having said no more for herself than she had previously said. And, it was like, we found her guilty and sentenced her, to burn at the stake or hang, whatever the particular thing was. And I'm like, oh, I must have missed what she'd said previously. And so I went back, and it's like, no, she didn't say anything. They didn't record what she said. And so there was this constant sort of absences and silences. Absenting is what I call it. And I'm using this medium as a methodology for describing the shape of absence, right? Absence does work. And here we have the four women, Sarah, Abigail, Lily, Amba, represented in outline. So there's an absence in the shape, but then they're also they're crossing the gutter. And, sort of appearing to me, even though it's an earlier panel and I'm in the present and they're way in the past, right? So the nature, so in addition to being able to put the past right up against the present, there's ways in which the methodology, for example, here, the relationship between panel and gutter can be used. So it's an incredibly generative medium. And now that I've learned how to do this, I'm never doing anything else. I'm working on my current book is another graphic narrative. I'm at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, frantically working on it now. So,
I mean, honestly, this is so much. There's a level of accessibility and presenting it in this graphic narrative that you can feel the urgency of the topic itself, and also too throughout the pages your sort of personal journey with it. You did mention how you aren't a spiritual person, yet you found yourself calling upon the spirit of your grandmother to sort of get you through this process. I'm also curious how this research, not just in recreating this book, but the research itself sort of changed how you connected to the people around you and your family, because you bring in your family, your son at the time, who was a young child, and
he's 24 now.
I did that math and I was like, wow,
he's 24
and adult.
and my partner, my wife, who's also in the book, we just had our 33rd anniversary. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Did it change the way that you were connecting to them and the other people around you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like having, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, there's a section where I'm teaching a class to undergrads at UC Santa Cruz, where I was getting my PhD. I was all but dissertation at the time. And it was a senior seminar, Engendering Slavery and Emancipation. And I had them read Beloved, Toni Morrison's Beloved, not because it's a history book, not because I teach literature, but because I think it's incredible. And I think it can really be used to teach a lot. Hold on a second. Maya! My 110-pound puppy.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah, but wait, I distracted myself with my dog. What was it? Oh yeah, and so it was really intense for me to teach that book, having a child, because folks who've read the book won't, the main character kills her child to prevent her from being re-enslaved. And so, yeah, it was intense. Yeah, this is Maya. Say hi, everybody. Say hi.
Hi, Maya.
See her tail, probably.
We love a fundraiser who wants to get engaged with the talk as well.
Absolutely. Come here, Maya. This is like
Coming on through. Oh my gosh, so many questions. Folks, if you also have questions too, feel free to start typing them in as well. I did have a question in regards, I was thinking about the topic because you chose specifically women. And this is actually one of the questions that came up in the chat. Why focus particularly on women, Black women in the slave revolt, and not just the process of of any slave revolts?
right, right. Yeah. So so I was studying slave resistance. And what I kept encountering in the literature, like, every book, every article that talked about slave revolt would say, in an article, the first few pages, in a book within the first, chapter somewhere, they would make very clear. But of course, women weren't involved in this revolt or any revolt, because we know that women weren't involved in this type of resistance. And there's particular historiographical reasons why this kept being shouted again and again and again. And I'm like, why do people keep saying this over and over again? Like, there must be something going on. And then it was like, I bet there were women involved. Why? How can you just say, no, there wasn't? And my dissertation advisor was like, no, I bet you're right. It's just, you're never going to find the sources. And like, for me, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. It's like, I'm going to find the sources. And I did, right? And so for me, then the question became like, if women exist in the primary sources, why is this historiography so virulently insisting that revolt in particular, specifically organized violent acts of resistance was a male thing, not, and so it became this whole issue of gender and resistance and sort of the gendering of revolt. So that's why I went there.
Yeah. That's always so intriguing in moments that are supposed to be objectively observing a moment in time, and yet depending on who is telling the stories, and you actually mentioned this in one of the panels, that history is written by the victors, there's an element in even these objective stories that there is that twist on it. Like, why can't women lead these revolts? Or what are you trying to say about womanhood, however you defined it in your culture? So that is very interesting.
Well, and also the idea that there's these objective, historical observations. I don't think that's actually true. I don't think it's possible. I think all knowledge is situated, right? And I think the issue is, are we going to be honest about how we're situated with respect to this knowledge we're producing, or are we not? And I feel like academic rigor requires us to explain how we're situated in relation to what we're, academic rigor for me begins there, right? It doesn't end when I say I have a personal relationship to this, because acknowledging that also helps me keep track of blind spots I may have, or all these other things. And it becomes really clear if we look at silencing in history generally. There's this great book called Silencing the Past. It's on the Haitian Revolution, how the Haitian Revolution has been written about by historians. Michel Rolfe Trouillot, he had 2 PhDs, even more education than me. Where he says, like, we think about a primary source document, like, for example, the transcripts from the 1712 trial of the enslaved people who participated in that revolt. We think of this as like a chronicle. Like, we think, chronicles are just chronicle the facts. They're not anybody's interpretation. They're not any. But he points out, like, well, if you're at a baseball game and you're listening to you're listening to the announcer. Let's say, I guess you're listening to a game on the radio or whatever. You hear every single detail. Like, this person's, at the I'm terrible at sports, and I find baseball kind of particularly. Let me not get in trouble. But anyway,
right.
All these details, right? Like, this person's up to base and whatever. but they don't tell you like how many hot dogs were sold, during the game or anything like that, because that was not considered relevant. And so these chroniclers, who the ones who said, having said no more for herself than she had previously said, what she actually said was not relevant. What they wanted to show was that there was a particular procedure that was followed. What she actually said was completely irrelevant. Um, I was just pushing back a little bit of the idea that there is some kind of objective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really important actually to push off, because that is something that even in the K through 12, that's how we sort of view history. And yet, at least in my school, they're trying to challenge that, like, is this fully objective? Because there's always parts that are missing to the story, depending on who the story is supposed to be told, who's telling the story, and how they've been socialized in the culture. So it's really important that you definitely put that out in the atmosphere, and the whole thing just needs a retooling and rethinking of that as sort of a root question. And speaking of retooling and rethinking and naming things, one of the questions from the audience is, how did you select the names for the women in your graphic narrative? And is there meaning behind those names?
Select them. Okay, so the names that I just, those were the names. So I didn't select them. With for the revolts in New York City, there is a revolt on a ship, the Unity. The revolt actually, happened, and but the records, the captain's logs are like, woman number 10 of this person's purchase did this and that. So it's not. So I created names for two of the characters, two of the women who were involved in that revolt. I didn't want to call them woman number 9 and woman number 11. But the thing I think that it's important for people to know too is that, the slave ship revolts, the reason why this stuff was documented at all was not just because slave ship captains were very attached to keeping careful records. It was for insurance purposes. So because the slave trade was insured, and there was actually a provision, if the property was lost in a revolt, the provision was called the, insurrection of cargo. That was the insurance, provision. And so there's a lot of ways in which, we have to do this, look at archival emergences of the people that stories we're trying to tell through really weird angles, in order to get those stories. And one of the things that's so frustrating to me is how poorly history is taught in high schools, generally speaking. And I was talking to Tuan just before this. It's like I've taught law school, graduate school, undergrad, and I actually taught high school for 3 years. I've seen firsthand how poorly it's taught. So the idea that we need to interrogate sources and try to find out, well, who was it written for and what purpose and why? And I think that's always going to be true, no matter how many people who've been pushed out or added in to the narrative. We always need to, think critically about, whatever's put in front of us, right?
Absolutely. And I can speak in the English departments, we're always asking that question, because I feel like English is always the one that's easiest, right? Because it's like, again, it's supposed to be subjective. We're reading novels, fictionalized tales, and all of these things. And that is not always extended to other pertinent topics such as history, which is living and something that you also embed in every panel and all the gutters and the frames, that this is just not something I'm going to the store from. There is a really powerful scene where I think it was in chapter 6, where you were playing with your son and there was tears, and then you went into the mirror and began to see it like it was coming alive for you, because it was pressing, it was urgent. And someone actually asked the question along these lines, what advice would you give, particularly to high school teachers of English, of history, on guiding students who are embarking on this process of investigating history of resistance?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, people need to, I don't even know where to start with that, because it's that. So some of the problems with it, if I was like the czar of curriculum design for high school, I actually helped write curriculum for the state of New York, actually.
Mhm.
But is that we should not focus on having students memorize dates and names and places until they have some kind of connection to what, until they care about it. And when they care about it, then of course they'll think, oh, I guess I need to understand this in order to understand this sequence of events, right? But if I start with historiography, I teach high school kids right from the beginning, this is how history is written about. Here's, like, we're going to compare different textbooks, chapters on this topic. Like, let's look at all these different textbooks and how they've all talked about, for example, the Nat Turner revolt. And look at how that's changed over time, how this is, and so people can see that this is this is a creative process, and one of it in the best way, creative, right? One of the things that has happened to me, because I've been on book tour basically since the book came out, June 2021, I've been everywhere, like, Norway. I mean, it's just been literally everywhere. And there's been so much more interest among high schoolers than I expected. I mean, I wrote it for adults, right?
Mhm.
But there's all these people getting drawn into it that I wasn't expecting. And also what they're drawn by, like they're really invested in my journey as a researcher. And I wasn't expecting that at all, and but it's like people walk away with this with a sense of, oh, this is what historians do. You know, this is what it means to be a historian. I don't know what, I mean, I think people think we just read books that other people wrote and write more books about those books. I don't know what yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's a very Hollywood thing, thinking about archaeology. Not everyone is doing that Indiana Jones is doing,
Right,
which you can argue is essentially grave robbing, and that's a
right, right.
whole other conversation. But it's very interesting how you highlight that, or you mentioned that your intention that this was supposed to be a book for adults, yet it's being used in K through 12 schools, and some of the folks commenting are saying they are using it as a text. And I think that it's important to sort of start from that angle of how is history told before you can actually dive into it and really sort of interrogate it. You mentioned that earlier in the conversation how you were initially doing your research and you decided to do women revolts, and so your graduate advisor was like, okay, and sort of kind of let you be, but discouraged in a way, because it was like you're not going to find anything. Did you find any pushback from your approach from either your folks who you work with dissertation or other historians, not just on the material, but also the medium in which you chose to give this information, to
Okay, that's
present the
way too
story,
much.
excuse me.
That's my, it has lots of, I'm like, oh, I'm going to answer. Oh, now there's another part. Oh, now there's another part.
Right? Just all the drama,
All
right?
the, yeah, all the questions all at once. Um, so the idea that women were involved, participated in slave revolt is ridiculously controversial. It was controversial when I wrote, it didn't matter that I had evidence, like, look, here there. It's like, it was still like all this pushback. And it remains controversial among many historians in the field. Hopefully that is changing. So there has been there was lots of pushback. I guess I care a little bit less these days about what professional historians. I just want to know that I'm doing my work right, and I'm an independent scholar, so yeah. And why I came to this, even revisiting this project, is because I was leaving academia, right? And I was like, before I leave, what I felt kind of, one of the things I felt really frustrated about was that I had done all this work, and I wrote a dissertation and subsequent articles, and that probably 10 people had read any of that, and that was very frustrating to me. So I was like, I need to get it in some kind of form that more people will have access to it, and that's how this came about. And then it got picked up, and it kind of took over my life in the best way. But yeah, it's been crazy busy since then. I was telling Tuan that there are all these iterations. It's, first of all, it's coming out in languages. It's multiple languages. So it came out in here Simon and Schuster, and then Penguin Random House of the UK. But it's also come out in French, German, Turkish, Korean, and Japanese. I
Oh,
know, right? It's kind of fascinating.
oh yes. And also too, someone asked the question, the audiobook format, it's on
Yeah.
there. You know, we
Well,
talked a little bit about before this. Is it a traditional audiobook?
no,
What
you can't. Right. You can't do an audiobook of a graphic narrative. It's just not possible, right? Because so
Mhm.
much of it is images. But we have created a play, like it's a full play, like and you can get it on Audible. Um, and I mean, it's got a full cast. DeWanda Wise, who starred in Jurassic Park, the Jurassic World this summer, plays me, which is hysterical to me. I find it hysterical.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a composer, I mean, it was just but it tells the story of how the book came about. It
Mhm.
basically tells the story. I mean, in addition to sort of intersperse the, several revolts from the book, it talks about me getting sort of repeatedly fired from academia and teaching, and how I ended up going, choosing to do this book before walking away,
Mm.
and then, yeah, kind of the rest is history, as they say.
Right. History, as we are reading it and seeing it and hearing it in play form.
Mm.
This is a question coming from the audience too. You actually talked about this, how you incorporated a lot of your personal story in this, from talking about your grandparents and then also including your family with your wife and your son at the time, who's now 24. And,
Mm.
mind shocker, just say that, just I can't believe it.
I
How
can't believe it either.
right? You're just like,
He's a sweetheart too.
oh,
Yeah. I'm not, it's objectively true. It's not just, yeah.
right. Was
Mhm.
right. Who's that story benefiting?
Mm.
You know,
Oh, I think we're going meta now.
right, right. I mean, hey, we spent 4 years on that campus. We can't help not to. Now, also sort of highlighted how deeply personal this entire journey was, the research and then rekindling it for writing this book, and how it was hard, definitely hard at times. How much of that story, that personal struggle, and also of your family, did you consider putting in the book? Were there parts where you were just like, I can't tell this because it's too raw or it dissuades? Did you, yeah, how did you decide how much of your family story you wanted to put
In the graphic narrative?
in the
Yeah.
graphic
So
narrative?
originally, it was just going to be the story of the revolts, but as Hugo and I were creating it, I was like, the sources are so fragmentary, and that I was like, I need to be in it to explain what's going on, right? So then sort of I put myself in as narrator, and then once I was in it, I'm like, well, I'm in it, so now let's tell the truth. And the truth was, the research was very hard, like emotionally, and so that's how, that's how that happened. It was funny because I was just at Swarthmore the last few days of September. I came and did a talk and a workshop, and and I hadn't been back since I graduated in 1985, because
Mm.
yeah, it was a very difficult experience for me. The amount of sort of racism and homophobia, violent homophobia, was off the hook, and I just so I just my experience with Swarthmore has just been trauma and debt.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was a great visit, actually.
Mm.
There, it was really good.
Mm.
So yeah, maybe, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's such a full circle moment. I do work in some of the affinity groups, and we have these conversations, especially from the era in which you were part of. A lot of the folks who I'm working with talk about how hard that time period was. And it feels like all in your research and the work that you've done and work in writing this graphic narrative, there's sort of a reconciliation process, of your time here on this planet and all of the places that you've been, and thinking about how hopefully this was a restorative process, because I've read it and I was taking on all the emotions, and sort of glimpsing it out and thinking about the intentions of this work. Do you feel like the narratives that you're telling and this graphic narrative and future graphic narratives will help make these uncomfortable conversations easier to have? Or do you feel there is so much pushback with a lot of schools banning, critical race theory, whatever they want to call it, that these narratives are going to still face some sort of uphill battle because of people's general sensibilities of toward history? That question makes sense.
Oof. It does. I don't know quite where to even enter that question, though. The issue about, so-called banning critical race theory. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I taught critical race feminism at Berkeley. Well, I had a Mellon postdoc. So I'm quite familiar with the field. And of course, what's being tried to be banned everywhere that's not that field, right? So, and to me, it's like, for me, I think, and if you listen to the audio drama, the kind of refusal of history that we're seeing today, that's quite in the headlines, that is always happening. And it's not just from the far right, it's from liberals as well. And one of the things that the audio drama tries to confront directly is the kind of white liberal, the way white liberals can also engage in the refusal of history. So, yeah, I don't know what other aspects of that question to try to address.
Yeah, I mean, it was heavy. It's like, how much do people want to really dive in? Because again, as you have highlighted so well in this narrative, there's a point in when history becomes personal, whether it's something that has directly affected you, whatever that means, or not. It's part of your journey. And so it's hard to disassociate and look at it. Like you said earlier, it can't be objective, right? Because
and clearly it is it's personal for everyone. And I think that's why there's so much effort involved in banning discussion about history of race in this country. There's this kind of, teleological triumphant narrative that we want to talk about how, race in this country and how, we're on this trajectory. Or Martin Luther King, he says, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. And it's like, no, it doesn't. There's not a moral arc that bends towards justice. Things happen. And so, and sometimes we go back 10 steps and one step forward. And so I think the issue of how do we, until we've had some kind of reconciliation, some kind of repair, we're just going to keep circling the same drain. And then people are going to wonder, why is the country burning down? Why are these people reacting to these people reacting to those people reacting? It's like, if we don't tell the truth and talk to each other, it's just going to, it'll always be like this or worse, so.
Yeah. And finding ways to connect across different mediums, right? Being a historian doesn't mean you're sitting reading, crusty books and obscure libraries and things like that.
I love crusty books and obscure libraries.
Me too, right? Me too. But there's it feeds in, that sort of image feeds into this idea of a disconnected from history and anti-intellectualism and all that stuff. Yet again, you just are like, no, it's so much more. And I think it's so powerful that in this process, you didn't just use the book to say, let's talk about Sarah and Abigail's story, or Staber Ikua, or the other folks you mentioned. I'm actually in this process because I understand as a historian and as a human being that history is me. It's that personal.
Right. And my point is that it's personal for everyone. History is personal for everyone. And that's why it's so contested. You know,
Mhm.
it's not like I'm uniquely historical, right, as a person. Um,
Mhm.
you know, yeah.
No, you kind of hinted at this before I mentioned of it, but you said that you were leaving academia, and someone was curious to talk about that process of leaving academia.
Yeah.
Don't mind sharing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if if you want all the details, check out the audio drama. It's available on Audible, even though it's not a audio book.
Mhm.
So it, it's so I don't even know where to start with that one. Let
Right?
me just say, check out the audio drama. Um, but you know, there were certain compromises I was not willing to make.
Mhm.
And although I was willing to make so many, but I wasn't going to like, we'll give you a job if you don't ever teach race. It's like, that's why I'm doing this. Or, you know, or, I mean, it's just, it's a long, it's a long story or deal.
Mhm.
I feel like we don't have time for me to get into it, but I think the main thing though, is that, you know, I was invited here to Salt Lake City to teach at the law school here at the University of Utah School of Law. Um, and you know, they specifically invited me to come teach race. They were like, we need you to come, we need someone to come and teach race. And so then, you know, they invited me to come and do that, and then didn't provide any support or deal with any of the incredible reactionary pushback from students and other faculty. And so that didn't work out. And then it's like, and then the recession happened, and it's like, well, we're in Salt Lake, I guess we're staying here now, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and so yeah, I don't yeah, I don't want to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out how to get this down into 3 minutes. But I did want to say something though about this issue of
Mhm.
history and the images of, you know, like one of the things that just struck me again is like, why is this ninth grader asking me questions about the historical research process? This is awesome. I'm loving it. You know,
Yeah.
I did this, you know, series of events at Tulane, and, you know, with the college, and then also all of these, there were like 100 high school kids. They bought like 100 copies of the book and gave it out, and there was a discussion group. Um, and one of the questions, there was this ninth grade kid who was like, you know, Dr. Hall, comic books are normally about, you know, superheroes. And I'm wondering, so who's the superhero in your book? And I was like, I was like, that's a really interesting question. And and I'm like, Black people. And
Mm.
then like they all burst into applause, right? And you know, if you've worked with teens, they don't burst into simultaneous, you know, spontaneous applause. It's just not a teen thing.
Yeah.
Is it like, are they going to clap? I don't know. Is she going to clap? I have no idea, you know. So I was like, what is it? And I was talking to this high school teacher who was there, and we worked so hard and created a curriculum on my website that really walks people how to teach this book. And like I said, it's for high school students because it clearly was becoming the thing that needed to happen, but useful for anybody, you know. It's more scaffolded than you might use for a college, but it's still helpful. And I was like, can you please explain to me why these younger people are drawn to this pretty geeky, you know? And she's like, well, but see, they know they're being lied to, but they don't know how. And then they see someone who looks like you going through this process of trying to uncover, you know, the truth.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to sit with that and be like, wow, you know. And you know, at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, I mean, there are 50 fellows there from all over the country, all kind of fields, from like poets to astrophysicists. I love it. I'm like, I love being at an institute. I want to always be at an institute. I want to be institutionalized.
Right?
But,
Now you know
but
that.
yeah, but people are approaching me like, oh, Rebecca, like I have this passion about this subject in biology that my research is based on. Could you tell me how I could use this medium to communicate ideas on my field? And it's just, there's so much like scholars now being like, wait, we can actually communicate complex things. And, you know, one of the things for me that the medium allowed, and my approach is that I wanted it to be accessible without losing its complexity.
Mm,
And
mm.
that was my goal. And I hope that I achieved it. You know, the paperback that came out in June, the NPR has this quote on the top. It's like, with its remarkable blend of passion and fact, action and reflection, Wake sets a new standard for illustrating history. I'm like,
Mm.
ooh, no pressure on this next book, right?
Right, and there's been so many comments and questions coming from K through 12 teachers in the chat about how it is sort of they're using it, and it
I
is.
want to hear about how they're using it. Do they know about my website that has this detailed lesson plan? I swear we spent probably 60 hours on that at least.
You know what? That's what I put in. I put in the link for folks who are there. I put in the link for the link to purchase the book, where you can see where it's sold, including the
Right.
paperbacks.
Let me put my, I don't know if this helps, but I'm going to put host and panelists. I'm going to type so
Yeah, definitely add it.
rebhallphd.org. So my website, rebhallphd.org, has under Wake, there's the primary sources are there. There are photos, all kinds of stuff that teachers would be interested in. But then there's also very detailed sort of curriculum, including a final research projects. I mean, we really went to town on this.
No, it's wonderful because again, like you said, it's accessible, and this is a way for it to come alive because the kids are asking questions. They've always asked the questions, and they're at the age where they ask the why. And when you mentioned earlier the importance of starting there with why history is told in this way, what's the foundation, then we can start making these conversations more accessible and actually get some stuff done. So we're not sitting there like I know you have little Maya there, but not a dog chasing its tail in a circle.
Right, exactly.
Because we're getting tired of.
We have dogs for that. We don't have to do it.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Dr. Hall, for taking the time to speak with us. And for those of you who are very interested, please check out the website, rephallphd.org. Under the Wake tab, you will find the curriculum. Also follow Dr. Hall on Twitter at Wake Revolt, and you can get a copy of the book. You can click on the link here, ShymanSchuster.com, and it'll tell you all of the ways to get the book. I've gotten the audio book, and some other folks actually in the chat mentioned they have the audio.
Audio drama. There's no audio
drama. Let me call it audio drama. We are
Yeah.
reframing things here. This is a graphic narrative and an audio drama.
An audio drama, yeah. And before I forget, I'm curious about all these K through 12 or these high school, I'm assuming, teachers. I love to hear what your experiences are. If you reach out to me on Twitter, I always respond. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Tuan can connect people if there are people here who want to reach me. But I'm very interested in how people are teaching this and how I can be of help, because
absolutely. And I can get that information to you and how to connect with them.
Thank
you again, Dr. Hall, and thank you everyone who participated tonight. And wherever you are in the world, I hope it's a good day, morning, evening, and all that stuff. And you get out there and get a copy of this book and start making moves to tell history in the way it needs to be told.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you, Tuan, for talking with me too.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Have a good night.